Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. My guest this time is writer and filmmaker Kate Muir. She's the producer of the two Channel 4 documentaries that she's made with Davina McCall, Sex, Myths and the Menopause, and Sex, Mind and the Menopause. And she's also an activist for the Menopause charity, dedicated to raising awareness and understanding of the menopause. She's also the author of Everything You Need to Know About the Menopause, but We're Too Afraid to Ask, which is about to be published in paperback. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you for having me on.
So much we could tackle from the book. Maybe we could start off with something very topical, which is the sort of the recent research into HRT and Alzheimer's, which is something that you talk a lot about in the book, and you do share a very personal story about your own mother, and as someone, my mother's also in sort of late stages of Alzheimer's, and so unlike many other women my age, I'm sure we're following this debate, this kind of unraveling of the kind of the research very, very closely. So what's your viewpoint?
I think it's incredibly good news, and it's good news for you and me who are daughters of Alzheimer's, because my mum died in 2015 of Alzheimer's, and it was a really long, horrible hole. And I had no idea that there were any answers, because there seemed to be no answers at that point. And we tried various drugs and they didn't work. And then when I was researching the book, and I got deeper and deeper into what estrogen can do in the brain and testosterone can do in the brain, and I grew increasingly astonished. And I started finding these small studies of mice and women, mice who'd had their ovaries removed and got really, really muddled in mazes. And then they gave them their estrogen back. And the mice found their way to the flag and the cheese. And you think about that in that sort of simplistic way, and we think, oh gosh, yes, no, I really need to find my way to the flag and the cheese. I do not want to live the life my mother lived in the last 10 years. A really smart woman struggling in a kind of place of hell for her and the people around her. And so the stuff is fantastic. And what came out last week from East Anglia obviously all these are observational studies over a number of years, and nobody's doing kind of randomized controlled trials on this. But they looked at HRT. Now, I read the paper, and of course it doesn't say which kinds of HRT they're specific. It does. It's all kinds of HRT. And actually some HRTs perform much better in the brain than others. And we know now that the body identical HRT, which is a copy of your own hormone, is, as any 12-year-old would tell you, better than a synthetic one, which is not a copy of your own hormone. So it was all HRT in that study, some of which is not as great as others, but what it showed was it kept women's brains working. It made them perform better in cognitive tests over time. Now, the study wasn't long enough to show what was going on with Alzheimer's, but the one done by Dr. Roberta Brinton, who we had on in our second menopause documentary with Davina McCall, and she has been studying women's brains for 30 years in Arizona, and is a genius, actually, and really supported by Alzheimer's research money in America. And she was the one who went through 400,000 women's records in Kentucky and discovered that women who were on body identical HRT were around 70% less likely to get Alzheimer's. So, and there are all these other small studies with mice, but for me, this was just another bit of icing on the cake, that it's quite simple. Look after your brain, and there's a good chance that you will lower your chance of Alzheimer's. And if you carry the gene like I do, it is absolute no-brainer for me to get HRT. And I a quarter of women have that gene, and 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women. And we're sitting around, flapping around, talking about menopause, and are we going to eat chia seeds? We really need to think about our brains in the future, and really think seriously about medicine and science here.
Actually, one of the things that surprised me that you talk about, and maybe it's not that surprising, but the fact is that the hormones, they're not patentable, so there's no
Mm.
kind of big pharma or less big pharma interest in terms of looking into what the benefits
Mm.
of HRT might be. They're not suddenly going to get rich off the back of discovering some new better form of estrogen.
I think that's an incredibly good point, and we need to look at the politics of capitalism around women's health. And when you look at the brand new osteoporosis drug which has come out, which costs approximately £9,000 a year per woman, and it's
Wow.
recommended by the Osteoporosis Society as a new thing, and then you think, well, taking HRT makes your bones grow back and improves your bone density. And, it can improve it within 3% in 2 years from where you were. And, women who are on HRT are far less likely to get a hip replacement, etc. You think, so they're making 9,000 a year on that drug in the pharmaceutical industry, and they're going to make what, £4 a month selling estrogel. That's what the NHS pay for it. It must be. It's an extraordinary difference in money. And who is financing the Royal Osteoporosis Society? Where does their money come from? Quite a lot of their money comes from big pharma because they're interested in promoting new research. Fair enough. But got a duty to be looking at what hormone replacement can do very cheaply. And they're not spending enough time on that because there's no money for that kind of research because it doesn't make money.
Yeah, I mean, you talk a little later in the book about costs to just the NHS in the UK of these chronic diseases of aging. So osteoporosis, you've already mentioned, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia. And I think, it's on page 275 of the hardback edition, you tot up these costs, comes to 148 billion if you include sort of mental ill health, which is a huge, huge chunk. But even then, surely you could see that, that kind of cost benefit analysis of, I think even the sort of the gold standard HRT you were talking about costs sort of 120, 130 pounds a year.
Yeah. I mean, it's cheap as chips. And in a way, I think it's the greatest thing that's happened to women in medicine, even more so in a way than the pill, because the pill, I'm making a documentary on the pill right now. The pill has its own problems and dangers and complexities, which we know about. But HRT, because it is these better hormones, the newer HRT, it's really, the story is perhaps no longer about menopause for me, but for aging and aging well. I think, I was updating the paperback of the book and putting in more stuff, and I was thinking, this is the argument I made with myself, with the science, to convince myself of why HRT works, how we should deal with menopause, all the mental health stuff, all the sex stuff, all that. But actually, I would write a different book now, and I indeed am writing another book, which is about longer life and aging and longevity. There's estrogen receptors all over your body and testosterone receptors everywhere. And the fact that we can get this back and we can live like men do with their hormones functioning until their 80s, whereas before we couldn't. We had these long lives, but we had these long, mildly unwell lives for a very, very long period of time. And I've been thinking about it because I've been looking after my neighbour for 3 years, who's now 93, and taking her shopping every week, and she's still living at home. And she just has a really, really bent spine and a Zimmer frame, and recently broke her hip. And you're so aware as you're looking at a Stannis lift and all these things. And she was a doctor, and she's read my book, and she kind of realizes that she could have
been different.
It's fine with estrogen, and she understands it, and she's absolutely firing on all cylinders. And it makes me want to cry, because there's a life that is really, really hard to be living right now, and we don't need women to live those lives anymore. We can throw the Zimmer frames largely in a pile, but politics and economics are standing in our way, and general sluggishness in the NHS.
But I mean, there's let's touch on the Women's Health Initiative study that obviously sort of halved almost overnight the number of people taking HRT. I think the documentaries that you've done with Channel 4 have gone sort of some way to redress that and to kind of reassure people, but we're still struggling with the kind of expertise in GP surgeries, where there's still, we hear time and time and time again about people being turned away, told horror stories of HRT, or told they're too young, or this, that, or the other reason for them not to be taking it, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, the WHI has been completely discredited in its methodology. I mean, some of it is quite useful. There are things we can pull out of there, which is, if you treat women with a synthetic estrogen and a synthetic progestin for a long time, it will raise their risk of breast cancer by a tiny amount. Now, we've learned that, but that's not what we're giving women now. So that's like saying, we were giving them Smarties and now we're giving them fruit pastels. It's a completely drug. But yet we are putting, the NHS website is basing its science on that study, which, financed by Big Pharma, financed by Wyeth and the American government. And nobody's bothered to finance a new study into the body identical versions. And we know in these wider observational studies that it's really good stuff. No one has shown that body identical estrogen increases your rate of breast cancer. And so it is extraordinary that we are still stuck in the science of it's really from the last century. Well, it's from 2002, isn't it? It's 20 years old, and it's wrong. And,
but it's so pervasive. People, it's like
the word body identical HRT is not on the NHS website. We talk about it all the time. They don't update their website. They don't explain it to women. And really, it's a scandal. It's a scandal of mistreatment, and it's not about money, because it's not expensive to change from one to the other. It really isn't. And what was the particular? If we're going to nail things down, and women now know about their estrogen, their progesterone, their testosterone, their three hormones, what we need to nail down in that study, the WHI study, is the progestin was terrible. It was medroxyprogesterone acetate, which just performs so badly in every study that there's been. It's not one you want, and it's still being sold, and it's still part of.
And many women have a really bad reaction to that as well, don't they?
I mean, everything about this is a scandal. And what the other thing, I've been thinking about is the menopause industry.
Well, you coin a fantastic term in the book, the menopause industrial complex, which I just love.
Industrial complex. I mean, it's in everybody's interest who is selling us menopause potions, menopause creams, lovely little lubes for our vaginas. It is in their interest for us not to get HRT. So that it is in their interest to keep us having these problems that 90% of us, if not more, do not need to have. And that is really, really interesting, that we are, again, putting on makeup to cover what's happening, inside, and really we need to tackle.
It's not going to help us with our Alzheimer's or our cardiovascular disease.
I am so radical on this, and I feel so strongly about it. I think it really matters, and I think we're having the wool pulled over our eyes by women who are not informed of the science as well, but by people who realise they're going to make a huge amount of money of some femtech app talking about the menopause and talking about sleeping and talking about yoga and selling you this and selling you vitamin compounds, which you can really, they're not going to make much difference. The only things worth having basically are kind of vitamin D and magnesium and omega-3. And if you put those together in a little packet, that would be just fine. You really don't need to spend £30 a month on your
or more in many cases. So let's think then about the actual rates of uptake of HRT are sort of in the sort of mid-teens. Certainly less than 20% at the moment.
Here's the thing. White women, 15% HRT. Black women, 8%. It's a huge inequality.
15%.
15% for white women, 14% generally, 8% for black women. And that is a real shame, because black women get much worse in African American studies in America. They haven't obviously bothered to study it in England, but they get much worse hot flushes for a longer time. So really, and they've got much more chance of getting Alzheimer's. And so it's really, really important to get that message to that community about getting onto HRT. And, there are wonderful people like Karen Arthur, who you've had on your podcast, who did Menopause Plus Black, who's realised what's going on with all that and is really out there talking about it. But there is a real kind of incredible class, economic, ethnicity divide on the people getting HRT and the people not. And after the two Davina programs, and I'm absolutely not saying it was just us, we were just part of a huge tsunami that kind of exploded.
A big part, though, I think.
And all these people like Make Menopause Matter and the Latte Lounge and all these people like Caroline Harris, it was just all of us together really pushed it. But since we did the programs, the use of HRT has gone up by 500,000 women in Britain. And if 500,000 women are not getting Alzheimer's, that's been really worthwhile.
You also, when you're talking about those sort of health disparities as well, you talk in the book about, so we've already talked about, the kind of how much the gold standard costs to the NHS, but actually that still costs 3 times more than the inverted commas sort of older style HRT, which is still very commonly prescribed. So again, is that down to cost cutting? Is it down to ignorance?
It is cost cutting. It's cheaper. It's down to ignorance. I mean, some of the body identical HRT is harder to balance up and get it going. A lot of women have a problem with progestins or progesterone. And actually, the really good, safest synthetic progestin, which is called dydrogesterone, is not available separately to take with transdermal gel at the moment. And if it was, I think more women could take that, because that's sort of quite good for protecting your.
Is that only in the combined?
Yeah,
version?
So it's in a combined pill, I think. But there are things like Bijuve coming out from Theramex, which is not available in lots of bits of the country, but it's entirely a body identical pill rather than a gel. But it seems to work really well. So there's better stuff out there, but you've got to fight for it. You've got to ask questions.
Well, also you've got to kind of if your understanding of is limited to what your GP is telling you, you're taking older style HRT and it's not agreeing with you, then you wouldn't necessarily know that there are other options out there if you're not seeing a sort of a menopause specialist who's up to date.
Laughed about this is the idea that we stick on one patch and it works for all of us, which is so wrong, because I don't know anyone who has the same set of hormones as me. We've all got this kind of PMS and this kind of pain and this kind of madness mid-cycle and this and when you think about women's hormones, they're just chaos. And the idea that we can treat chaos with one single pill or one single patch, and we all know, those of us who are on HRT, I know people who are on 4 pumps a day. I'm on 2.5 pumps a day, but sometimes I go to 3 if I feel a hot flush coming through. I know exactly where I am, but you're aware that your hormones are doing stuff, they're going up and down. Doctors should be taught how to kind of make HRT work for women. It's not much to ask. It would make such a difference to the population. It's not an expensive thing, but it might be a second consultation, and it really, really would help them. And, I feel we should go in and demand more and ask more, because it makes such a difference to our lives in the long run. And it makes a difference to our families and our divorces and our lovers and our pleasure in life. Really, why should we have a shit life? Why? Why should we have stiff joints? Don't want them.
You talk about a little bit about your own experience in the book and about breakdown of your long-term relationship. Do you ever have those sort of what if moments of if HRT had been on the table a few years earlier?
My life would be different. I love my life the way it is now, and I don't think I'd have gone out there and fought this revolution if I hadn't kind of been kicked in the face in my own life and had an incredible struggle and a kind of really difficult time where I left home and my children, there was a big divorce and I lost my job and I was just in utter chaos. But I think that chaos really, really teaches you what it's like for other people to live in chaos that you don't understand as a kind of middle class person who's had a nice education and a steady job for a while. It's just, and
as a catalyst for you.
Really important. But now I've got a new partner. I'm making books and documentaries. I didn't know I could make documentaries. I also have, and I think I'm really lucky. I have a cause. I have a thing I am fighting for. And I get up every day. And because probably I'm on HRT, my hormones are not all dippy. They're like, I'm no longer a clapped out banger. I'm a Tesla. I'm going in there at 3 every day.
Love it.
I know what I'm going to do. My hormones are not going to fail me in the morning. I'm not going to feel bad. I'm going to feel energized and strong and possibly angry. But, all of those are good things in the work we're all trying to do in this space, I think.
Yeah. Was it a big uphill struggle to get Channel 4 to commission the first documentary?
Yes. The documentary was turned down twice because menopause was boring and for old women by various channels and commissioners. And eventually I was at a Time's Up meeting, actually, as a film critic. And I met Dorothy Byrne, who is, at that point, was head of Channel 4 Current Affairs. And I said to her, "You're at Time's Up meeting. Dorothy, we've got to do this. This is why."
Go on.
And she said, "Yeah, no, we've got to do this." And she was about to retire, actually, and it was the last program she commissioned. And she'd been having a terrible time, and she's said this publicly.
What a parting shot.
Age 60 or 60 something, actually, and has gone on to be the head of a college as well now. So she really has done. She did a great thing commissioning that program, and I don't know who else would have. And of course, when the programs went out, like the first night, it was like 1 million viewers, and then by the Friday after, it was 2 million, and you realised everybody had told everybody to watch it on catch up. And
were you surprised? Were you surprised by the reaction, the strength of the
yes.
kind of? Yeah.
But Davina was fantastic because Davina's own story and her looking young and not like what you imagined a menopausal woman was, and her being utterly honest about things like a dry vagina on television and the mental health things. I mean, her braveness and her honesty, because she worried about it in her career if that was a good idea. Because
she's talked about it being, potential career ending.
She hadn't particularly studied the science or anything until she got on and she was just presenting the program, and then it began to dawn on her what a massive kind of can of worms we'd opened. And then kaboom, she's really taken it off and run with the campaign herself. And done that book, which has reached a whole audience, that a book like mine wouldn't reach. And I think that's really, really good.
And you've talked about the uptick of people going on to HRT as a probably direct result of those two documentaries. But it seems like that potentially has kind of been a sort of a factor in the sort of something like the HRT shortages. I know we've had them before, but at least it's starting to make that a lot more public and sort of visible.
Well, interestingly, the shortages are mostly in the body identical HRTs, the good ones, the small patch, which is estradiol. And then we all had that incredible struggle to get estrogel for a while and Lazetto, and I certainly did, and ended up using some of the props from the television program till I could get with half of the job left. And then I managed to last out for another 2 weeks, I think, till they came into my chemist. But, it was mad. But this will continue to go up, and the NHS need to recognise that women themselves will come in and ask for this, and they just need to make sure they're supplied, and then they won't come back 10 times to their doctor, getting antidepressants or saying they've got fibromyalgia, or whatever it is. They will not be struggling, so they'll actually save the £70 doctor's appointment that people keep coming back to, by supplying these very, very cheap drugs to women. And I don't even consider them drugs. They're just replacing your hormones. They're just putting something back that was already there. We're not taking something weird. It is the most natural thing. It's far more natural than sage tea.
And you talk, I think this is something that I read an article about a few weeks back, but you talk in the book about we did have at some point a testosterone patch that was withdrawn in 2012. It just wasn't making enough money. I wonder if they kind of reintroduced that today.
I think some of the drug companies are bringing in a female testosterone, and they're waiting to get permissions on it all. But it would be so useful to get, so you don't have to do that big squirt. I don't know. I've got a male one. You do this big squirt, and she said, "Oh, take half of the squirt and put it back in a pot in your fridge till tomorrow." I was
like, "Are you kidding?"
I worked out how to do a half squirt, but sometimes I get it a wee bit wrong. So some days it's big testosterone, some days it's little. But it kind of. But why should we have to do that? Why couldn't they give us a plastic pump that pumps the right amount out? It's not much to ask, is it? It's these tiny little irritations that every morning I'm going, I've done the wrong amount.
It's going to be a busy day on it.
When you think about this in a kind of macro way, with a big if you were thinking about this in a very intelligent way about a big health service change and how much money you could save and how much mental health trauma people could avoid in perimenopause, you'd absolutely do what Carolyn Harris was suggesting and get women in at 40 or 45 and say, this is what could happen. This is what we can give you.
Yeah. Here's your options.
And
Go and think about it.
It should also be, we advise you to take this unless you can't and unless you don't want to. I think that would be a way to turn it the opposite way around and not go the natural route. I mean, I feel very strongly about this. The natural route is a very bad idea for the majority of women. In terms of aging, you will age worse taking the natural route, even if you are wild swimming and running and eating all the right foods. You've got to tackle it.
And there does seem to be, it's almost in some places, it feels like if you go down the HRT route, you failed to have a natural menopause. You haven't been able to cope.
But the HRT route is a struggle in itself because it's really hard to get your hormones absolutely right, and you've got to look upon it as maybe a 2-year project. A lot of people get it right straight away. It took me 5 years to get it right, but it was worth it.
That long? Yeah, so definitely. I think people, and also managing people's expectations before they start, that it's not necessarily going to be a simple kind of one and done.
Though I have to say, having said all that stuff about I wouldn't go down. I mean, I do. I run and I dog and I eat well and I don't drink actually. But I have started cold swimming in Parliament Hill, Lido, 3 times a week with my friend Deb Ross, who is the Spectator film critic and doesn't seem to be the sort of person who would plunge into icy water, but indeed does. And it's going to be 1 degree this week. And we have been in on 1 degree.
The endorphins going.
Heroin high after that for about an hour. Absolutely fantastic. So I really do think, and that is about brain and synapses and all sorts of things and brown fat changing in your body. So it does have these incredibly profound physical changes and mental changes. So, I'm not absolutely against, adding to my armory.
No, not at all. My husband's still trying to persuade me of the benefits. So he's a sauna aficionado and he's set up a mobile sauna business and sort of loves that whole, plunging into a cold lake afterwards. So it's just like, I'm yet to be persuaded. But
you can plunge into some river in Oxford, surely, some icy river, no?
We do have a few sites around, but maybe when it's a tiny bit warmer. You also go and sort of work with corporates, do sort of on-site training, because obviously, we know that potentially 1 in 10, maybe even more, women leaving the workplace because they're not sort of supported, because they're struggling. What kind of good practice, best practice are you sort of starting to see out there with companies that are supporting people?
Well, the companies are really great about the ones who kind of call you in to give them a talk and give them a PowerPoint and tell them what's going on. They're already the ones that have made the step forward. But having an incredibly direct conversation in their kind of executive kind of boardroom or suite with 90 people is really good. And men in particular are really interested mostly because of their wives and partners, but also they suddenly see this very, very clearly. And when they see the sort of perimenopausal and postmenopausal brain scans, which are firing on completely different cylinders, on my PowerPoint, they suddenly go, ka-ching. This is people's brains changing. They don't need to change. They don't need to suffer. There's a cheap solution. We need to direct women in a medical direction as well as, being sympathetic. And there's obviously a strong thing about, we put little fans on their desk and we're really nice to them. But there's a really dangerous anti-feminist patronizing thing about that, which I really, absolutely. People need help in perimenopause when they don't know what's going on and they can't necessarily do anything about it. And you need sympathy and you need to be near a bathroom if you're going to be one of the 44% of women who have giant periods in perimenopause. So there is that, but I'm very aware that the corporates see it's a waste of money losing that woman. I don't want to lose that woman. What can I do? And lots of them have put in private health policies that have a menopause section. And obviously, this is going on at the top. And, it's going on in big corporates. Like I talked to B&Q the other day, and, big companies like Tesco are doing it. But I think little companies maybe not. And the economic argument is so compelling. And, looking at the NHS, the majority of nurses are...
Yeah, you've talked a lot about this on your Instagram account, for example.
40%
and
I think are of perimenopausal or menopausal age. And, you throw a 50-year-old nurse in the bin and replace her with a 22-year-old nurse that's cost you thousands and thousands to train, and you've chucked 30 years of experience away. And, she is a calm genius who can deal with anything and put up with anything and, knows about the strangest symptoms in the world. And yet you throw that away on because people can't cope with menopause on 12-hour shifts.
We desperately need them. We need them to stay.
The worst thing about this is the NHS put out a 25-page policy the other day on their menopause policy and advice to, their HR policy. And not in a single page did it mention HRT. It mentioned maybe going to a doctor, but it was all about all the other stuff and being nice and making everyone feel happy. And actually, you're on a 12-hour shift. You cannot sit in front of a little fan at your desk, and you can't take time off to work at home. And, there's definitely an ideological block on this. I don't know why.
It does seem very strange.
Me as an intelligent person, that why would the NHS write a 25-page menopause policy without mentioning HRT? It's the height of stupidity.
So, and you talked about you're writing a new book. When can we expect to see that one coming out?
2 new books.
2.
So I mean,
God bless HRT.
So I'm doing a book on the pill, and that has turned out to be as gripping as menopause, as important. I mean, there's just extraordinary things going on with hormones, the pill, how it changes, particularly how it changes young girls' brains between 15 and 19 being put on the pill, how we grow a different brain, basically, the depression, the risks, the best pills, the not best, and using the pill for good. I mean, everything is it's a really gripping investigation, that. But I'm also doing another book on midlife, and I suppose I'm going to do all the things that I felt I kind of missed in my first book, because my first book was a big kind of scientific argument, and we're going to bust the menopause taboo. We're going to talk about HRT, and we're going to read the science and have the footnotes on HRT, and we're going to talk about things like HRT and breast cancer and be really brave about the sort of medical side. But then I've been thinking more and more about psychotherapy. I've got lots of friends who are psychotherapists, and that midlife mental crisis. And you do change. You change utterly. And, you are now looking, at 50 in the direction of death rather than birth. What are you going to do with these next 20 or 30 years that will be worthwhile, that will help people, that will help you? How are you going to enjoy yourself? Is it worth going to take, magic mushrooms to change the levels of depression in your brain? Is it worthwhile swimming? And I'm also going to put a Menopause 101 chapter about aging and longevity in that, which will almost summarize, I'm not going to argue. I'm going to say, this is the science. This is what's right. Get it now, basically, if you can.
Sounds good. Perhaps you'll come on and talk to us again when that one's out. Look forward to reading it. Kate, thank you so much. I'm going to pop a link by the time this gets published. Will certainly be out and available. Do you know if the Davina documentaries, are they still available online to watch back on streaming?
On Catch Up, you can get them. And I think we'll have a new documentary coming in May, summer. I don't quite know when.
It was absolutely lovely chatting to you. Thank you again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading my book.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.